Welcome to another episode of the Secular Buddhism Podcast. This is episode number 61. I am your host, Noah Rasheta, and today I'm sharing the audio of an interview I did this morning with Yael Shai. Yael offers expert guidance on beginning a meditation practice and explores how to bring that practice to relationships, social media, social justice, and the ups and downs of everyday life. This interview was recorded live and it was streamed live through to the Facebook channel and to the YouTube channel for the Secular Buddhism Podcast. And I wanted to extract the audio and upload it to make it this new podcast episode. While I was checking this, I noticed looks like the last 2 or 3 episodes have been interviews. And I wanted to remind you that this isn't the format that's taking over as the main format for the podcast. It just so happens that I've had 3 interviews, and in between those 3 interviews, I have not had a chance to record a podcast episode under the original format, which is just me preparing a topic. But I do plan to continue doing that. Recently, I've been hunkered down. I'm working on a new book called Essential Buddhism for Beginners. And this is a project that I was commissioned to write from a publisher. And it's been really exciting because I think this book is formatted in question and answer format. It's formatted in a way that I think it will be a very valuable tool or a resource for people who are interested in learning about Buddhism, but also for anybody who's already practicing to kind of have almost like a glossary to be able to go look up different terms based on questions. What does this mean? What does that mean? So it's a project I'm really excited about, but the deadline for it is January 8th. So I've been hunkered down working on that and limiting the time that I'm spending recording new podcast episodes. But after January, I plan to jump back into this full force with the 3 new formats for the podcast. So the original format is what I've been doing all along, where I prepare a topic and I present it. The second format is the interview, and I've had a lot of people reaching out to me, good authors and really good people to interview. So I'm excited for some of the interviews I have lined up. So that's the second format, the longer, roughly 1 hour long interviews like this episode. And then there's a third format I'm going to introduce. Every week I have an online group that meets, like an online Sangha, and I prepare, I guess what you would call a Dharma talk or a message for the end of the meeting. It's usually 10 to 15 minutes long, but I'm recording those and I'm going to start uploading those. So I'll have more content to share more frequently. A lot of people have mentioned how you enjoy listening to this podcast, and sometimes getting it once a week, or as I often do, once every couple of weeks, isn't enough. And I've been asked if I have more content to throw it on there. So I'm going to start uploading the third format, which is those kind of shorter snippets. These are going to be smaller segments that just have more filler content. So be looking forward to more podcast episodes coming soon. You also may have noticed a new music introduction in this podcast episode. Several weeks ago, I was contacted by Yoseba, who is a film composer. And Yoseba was very kind to offer mixing an audio track for me to use in the podcast that would go more with the mood and the style of the podcast, which is meant to be relaxing. So that's where the music comes from. I'll be using that as the new introduction and exit for the podcast interviews or podcast episodes. So if you enjoy that, you can always check out Yoseba's work at the website JOSEBABRITELOLA, yosebabritelola.com. And that's with a J. So check out Yoseba's work. And thank you very much, Yoseba. I hope you enjoyed listening to your audio on this podcast. Thank you. I'm excited to use that from now on. So without further ado, I give you the audio of the interview with Yael Shai. Welcome, Yael. Thank you for being on the show.
So happy to be here. Thank you so much. I'm a big fan of the show and the podcast, whole thing.
Well, thank you. Okay, so I'm excited to talk about a couple of topics specifically. I think the two I'm most excited about are the expertise that Yael brings to the topic of mindfulness and relationships, because we are all in relationships, right? This not just romantic relationships, which I think is key here, but any relationships with siblings, with parents, with children. And then the other overall topic is social activism. We're going to talk a little bit about that, specifically how do we change the world without burning out. So let's start with the first one, mindfulness and relationships. Tell me a little, before we jump into that, tell us a little bit, Yael, about how you got into mindfulness, meditation, Buddhism. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. So I started meditating when I was a college junior. And really, I came to it from a lot of suffering, a lot of stress, and not just kind of the stress that people often talk about with college students, like so much homework, fights with the parents, deep existential stress about what is the point of being alive, what is my role in this world, how am I supposed to survive when all of these range of feelings just rushing through me, and a lot of anxiety and fear just constantly. So I was having panic attacks regularly, and the circumstances of my life were kind of falling apart around me, and my parents were getting divorced. I had ended a relationship. I felt very lonely and alone. I just was struggling hard. And so then I was having a really hard time. I sought out a bunch of different kinds of advice. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to get better? And I found my mother actually passed along to me a flyer about a meditation retreat, a 7-day silent meditation retreat. I had no concept of what that was. I had never meditated before. Yeah, it was crazy because I was imagining like a nice spa vacation with maybe like hot tubs or massages. And I get to the retreat center, and it was really just 7 days of from morning till night meditation without much of a break at all. And we weren't allowed to talk to anyone. We weren't even supposed to be making eye contact. It was extremely intense. I had multiple panic attacks within a couple of days. I was having fantasies about hot wiring cars and getting out of that place. And then about midway through on the retreat, I finally got to talk to a teacher about all the stress I was experiencing. And he said to me, and I said, I'm just so full of fear all the time. And he said to me, fear doesn't like the light. If you shine a light on it, then sometimes you can help to understand, and fear will eventually disperse. And so that began that process of trying to look at what was underneath all that anxiety, what was the root of so much of that panic and stress. And that really just started the journey for the rest of my life in this world, in this meditation world, because it almost immediately cracked through so much of that pain and anxiety that I was experiencing on a daily basis. Of course, it didn't solve it right away, but over the years, it almost transformed like the chemical makeup of my body, so that I really haven't had a panic attack, like 10 years almost. And so that's sort of how I came to this practice.
Wow. Yeah, it seems intense suffering is a common path for people to find their way to this path, right?
Right.
I know that's certainly the case for me. It's the case for a lot of people I've encountered. And it seems like these meditation retreats almost all consistently somewhere around that halfway mark is when people realize, okay, I can do this, and then it becomes a really neat experience after that.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Is it because we're just not used to doing anything remotely close to sitting in silence for that long?
Yes. I think we're not used to it on multiple levels. We're not used to it on the just like our everyday consciousness level, but our bodies are not used to it. So in the beginning, everything is screaming either in pain, or I know many people who just slept through their first 3 days because it's not the body has no idea what it's doing. You sit it down and you say like, don't move. And so it thinks it's bedtime. And so there's all kinds of things that come up. The Buddha called these things hindrances that come up when we sit down for meditation. And it's especially for beginners who do what I did a crazy thing. Most people have had some exposure to meditation before you do that. But retreats are just incredible incubators of ourselves. And most of us do not sit with ourselves and our minds for that intensity for that amount of time.
Yeah. When I think of meditation in general as the art of becoming comfortable with discomfort, I think retreats like what you're describing, that's boot camp, right? That's the
is boot camp.
Yeah, you're going to sit there and it's going to hurt until suddenly at some point you become comfortable with that discomfort. And I imagine that's why it's so transformative too.
That's right. Yes, that's right. And it's just that if anybody's thinking about doing one, if you haven't done one yet, the real key is just to have as much as you can to muster the faith that something will happen. That's what we promise whenever I lead a retreat, that something will happen. You don't know exactly what it will be, but just to hang in there through that torturous, for some people, beginning time. Maybe not for everyone, but certainly for me, those early days.
Yeah. Well, cool. Thanks for sharing that. So let's jump into the topic of mindfulness and relationships. So you have a chapter in your book. I'm trying to remember exactly what it's called. I think it's is it mindfulness and relationships? Mm-hmm. Oh, mindful relationships. Yeah, that's exactly what it's called.
Yes.
In the chapter, in the chapter of mindful relationships, you kind of bring together you merge the concepts of how does mindfulness benefit a relationship? So let's talk about that a little bit. Kind of summarize the marriage of these two things.
Sure. So like you said, everybody's in versions of relationships. And I think what we all crave out of relationships is to be fully seen or heard, seen and heard, to be felt and seen for who we really are, and to be heard, our voices heard, our needs heard, even if the other person can't always meet the needs or can't fulfill our dreams, our fantasies. To really be seen is so healing and what so many of us are seeking. So in order to then be able to really see another person and to see them in their totality, then I think the practice of meditation and mindfulness kind of enables us to see ourselves, to open up our own hearts to ourselves, to see all the ugly and the difficult parts, to see the parts that we believe are beautiful and strong, and to have space for all of those different elements. And so the more we do that, the more we cultivate like a loving, appreciative, accepting relationships to ourselves, the more we have space to let in the totality of another person and to really see them, rather than what often happens, which is we use the frame of another person to kind of try and discover whether or not we are lovable. And the person feels used and feels unseen. And we feel frustrated because we're not getting the right answers. We're not kind of getting to the right thing. And everybody suffers. So the metaphor I've heard about this is from a Zen teacher named Thich Nhat Hanh, who I'm sure many of your listeners know. And he talks about how if you put a handful of salt in a glass of water and you try and drink it, you can't drink it, it's disgusting. But if you put a much even more than a handful of salt in a very large, clear lake, you can still drink it, and there's enough space for it to dissolve, and the lake water can still taste delicious. And the metaphor being that when we have a lot of room and space for the difficult things that arise and for all the different parts of ourselves, then we have that room and space for other people.
Yeah, I like that, the analogy of the salt. I think about from the psychological standpoint, we have the negativity bias, right? Where I forget what the ratio is, but for every X amount of good things, or like for every one bad thing, it takes X amount of good things to offset that. Right. Do you know what that ratio is? Is it 4, 10, something like that?
Exact one. I know exactly.
It's higher. It's like this.
Yes, exactly.
And I think in relationships that becomes really evident, right? Your especially romantic relationships, your spouse can do 10 nice things, but then they do that one thing, and boom, that's where our focus goes. And I imagine this concept of the salt kind of being like that. It's like, well, if you're just focusing on this, it's really salty, but you increase your awareness, and it's not that the circumstances changed, but the perspective changed. Right. Now, that's something I like that you highlighted in your book, bringing it back inward, right? Because what we're trying to do through mindfulness practice in general is that same thing in relationship to reality. There's reality, and then there's me, and I feel separate from it, and everything I'm looking for is out there. But then mindfulness kind of tweaks this, and you turn that shift, you start to look inward and realize, oh, it's here, it's me. And I think that's hard to do in a relationship because we're so programmed to think everything I'm looking for in the success of this relationship is contingent on that other person. It's outward, right?
Yes.
So when you notice, like when we start to apply these principles, mindfulness principles into something like a relationship, you brought up this concept of the mirror, that relationships are like a mirror. And I really like that. So tell me a little bit about, like, how does that really work in a practical sense? I'm in a relationship with my wife, for example, and there's this mirror. What are some of the common things that we see, that we hope to see if we don't realize there's a mirror, but when we realize it's a mirror, what do we start to see? What changes?
It's a great question. So I'll use myself as an example because that's the easiest for me to use. So I was single for a very long time, much longer than I wanted to be. And I think I put a lot of hope and pressure on if I met someone, then, and they saw me as like the one, the most beautiful, the best person in their life, then I would finally in the inside really feel that way about myself, that I was worthy, that I was lovable. And it meant so much to me that many, potential suitors came along, and if I sensed even a little bit that any of them couldn't do that for me, couldn't kind of present me with that picture of like, you are everything, and then either it was my fear or something else just kind of kept getting in the way, and I kept thinking, like, that person's not for me, that person's not for me. When I finally met my husband and we were, getting serious, then nearly all of our fights in those early years were the ones that I started were sparked by this feeling of jealousy, like that he secretly wanted to be with someone else, that he like really liked someone else better, that he thought someone else was more attractive. And the feeling in me would be just so much shame and fear and anxiety and pain because I was still looking outward to get that inner feeling of like, I'm lovable, I'm worthy. And even though he was giving me a lot of love and was giving me a lot of support, as long as it's outward, it will never be enough. That's what I realized. We all want outward love and attention, and that's fine. But when it's to answer that core question about ourselves, then we are not, we're never going to be happy. It's never going to be satisfying. And that's where a lot of my mindfulness practice had to come in. I had to say in those most difficult moments, you know what? This relationship is now, it is just about me looking in the mirror at myself and my own worth, and whether or not I believe to myself that it's about my own worth. It'd be different if he was giving me a lot of evidence, you know, that he really wasn't that into me, but that wasn't happening. And so that's where the kind of mirror comes in. Once you see, you know what, this is happening over and over again. This is triggering something over and over again. And once you see it, then you have to go back in. And every time I was about to kind of start a fight along these lines, and this has been until recent years really, then I had to take a break. I had to take some space, and I needed to bring a lot of love and compassion to my own painful experience of what that felt like to not really fully have that strong sense of I'm lovable, I'm fine, I'm beautiful, I'm okay. And took a lot to do that. And then part of it is to grieve almost that the partner is not going to be able to do that for you. They can give you a lot of wonderful things, but they can't answer that essential question.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. Something I want to clarify. Do you hear that echo, or is that just me?
Maybe a slight one, but nothing that's distracting to me.
Okay. Okay. Oh, that went away now. Okay. So with this concept of, looking inward and finding the contentment and the love there first, I want to clarify to anyone listening, what we're not saying that as long as I love myself, I can stay in this unhealthy relationship, with this person who's abusive or something like that. That's not at all what this is insinuating. I think what I'm hearing, and I want to be clear about it, is what Yael is saying is that sense of completeness that comes in a relationship only comes when it's complete here, on your side. When you are okay with you, then you can be okay with, that's when the relationship can be completely whole. And I want to correlate this to this societal view of, my other half, right? And the idea is that I'm half and someone else is going to complete me. But without that other half, you're not whole. And this is saying, no, that's nonsense. This is saying mindfulness helps you realize you are it, right? You are essentially it. And when you are whole, you take a whole and another, whatever the other is, that other may be half, or it may be, it doesn't matter. Wherever that other thing is, you work well with that other part because you are whole, right? Does that sound more along the lines of what you are insinuating?
Yes. The only thing I want to also clarify in there, so absolutely yes, this is not about like a settling, like if you can't find someone that you're matching with and you should just like settle for them because it's really all about you. Don't believe in that. Not a good idea. Or accepting people being unkind or are not good to you. Absolutely not. And that's just really a lot of, it's just more suffering, So yes, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying with a person you really love, and once you've had the chance to really see that person, then we come to that question of, in each of these difficult interactions, where are you and who is them, and where is this appropriate boundary? So my stepfather, who is a very wise man, always says this line, love is boundaries. And we don't think of it that way. We often, especially in the Buddhist-y world of we are all one and we are interconnected, which is very true. But I think when it comes to relationships, the seeing and understanding the boundary of where someone else begins and you end is, even in a relative sense, is really, really important to all kinds of relationships, romantic and otherwise. But before I forget, the one thing I just wanted to adjust is that this is not a static process. So it's not like, okay, I am at one with all of myself. I am fully enlightened and love myself, and now I'm ready to be in a relationship. It's a constant process of back and forth and figuring out what's yours and what's the other person's, and just trying to be awake to the whole thing, even if you're still stuck in the really hard place and you don't love yourself or you have a lot of self-loathing. Just trying to be aware of it goes a long way.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. From the Buddhist perspective, we talk about and acknowledge that life is, or things are impermanent, right? In other words, everything's changing, constant change. And in a relationship, I mean, this is extremely evident, right? Because then there's the me that was me when I got married, for example, and that's not the me that I am today. Same with my partner, with my wife. She's not the person I married, and I hear this from people all the time. Concepts like, "Oh, that's not who I married," and it's like, well, of course, that's absolutely not who you married, and you're not who they married. So this idea of looking in the mirror relative to time is you're always looking in the mirror, because you're not the you were 5 minutes ago, much less the you that you were, when you got married or when you started the relationship. So emphasizing that this process is dynamic. If you ever think we got it, we figured it out, we're there, that's when you should probably worry, because you don't get there. The point is you're always getting there. And I think I like thinking about that in terms of relationships, especially romantic ones with my wife. I'm thinking we'll never get there. That's the point. We're always building and working on the dynamic of our relationship. Who is the me that is in love today? Who is the person that I'm loving today? Because that's not the same person from yesterday. And that the ability to keep it fluid like that, I think is in our case has been really helpful. It was in a period of time in my life when I felt like things were stagnant. I'm the me that I've always been. That's when there was conflict, where I was thinking, is this not my soulmate? Did I pick the wrong half? Is there another half that would have been more suitable? And, because I was thinking in terms of that sense of permanence in the relationship. But when I learned to look in the mirror, that was a drastic change. And when I understood the aspect of impermanence in the relationship, that changed the dynamic.
Yes, so well said. And it's just this process of continually waking up and being like, who's in front of me? Who is this person? And when you're together a long time, I think my understanding, I haven't been together yet with my husband for longer than, I think we're going into 4 years, but I think it's even more important to just really see the person instead of being like that kind of hazy, yeah, I know who you are. And certainly if you have kids, if you have any of these relationships in our lives, I think to really keep committing yourself over and over, like the same way we come back in meditation practice over and over again. What's happening now? What's real now? What's the story in my mind? We come back to this person. Who is this person now? How are we interacting now? Who am I now in this thing? And it's a beautiful practice. It's a really intense but beautiful practice.
Yeah, and I think it requires a lot of vulnerability too, right? Because to show up and just be seen, like, well, this is me. It seems like in relationships, especially romantic ones, we're always adding layers. I did this for a long time in my marriage. I'm trying to be who I think she thinks I should be, right? And so I'm measuring myself, who I am versus who I think, and it's, the layers are insane here, because it's who I think you should, It gets really crazy. And you're doing the same thing back. You're comparing your partner it's like, are you allowing them to be who they are, or who you think they should be, or who they think you think they should be?
Yeah.
Like it gets extremely complicated with the layers and masks that we put on. And I think this, the mindfulness approach is just saying, like you just said, you show up and you just ask, well, who am I? And who is this? And what is now? What is happening now?
Yes.
Why are we saying this? Why am I feeling this? And that, I think, is a really powerful exercise.
Yes. And the times when I felt kind of like that upswell of love for my partner is oftentimes those times when I'm like, oh, look at this person that's sitting on the couch with me that I'm like, did you pick up the milk yesterday? Like I usually kind of, not ignoring, not taking for granted, but just like they're a piece of the furniture. But when I look and I'm like, wow, this is kind of a miracle. We're trying this thing together. We're doing this thing together. And that's where these like swellings of love come from. Because I think it's impossible to feel that all the time. But those moments are really special.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's been great. I want to take this concept and expand it a little to other forms of relationships. Something that you mentioned in the book that stood out to me was your understanding of the relationship of love in terms of your son. How old is your son?
He's 13 months, and I have another one on the way, actually.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
So you mentioned something that really resonated with me, because I have 3 kids, ages 8, 5, and 2. But you mentioned like this realization that with your son, you would give your life up for him in a heartbeat, no questions asked. So it's like there's this idea of conditional love that I think we kind of get stuck in. Like, I love you because you love me, but if you didn't love me, then I probably wouldn't love you back, right? But then suddenly kids come along and you discover this new level of it where it's truly unconditional. I don't need anything out of it. Like the joy of it is that I get to love you. And that's what I was gathering as I was reading that part in your book where you're talking about your son. So let's talk about that a little bit. How, it reminded me of like metta practice, right? Where you're trying to have that sense of unconditional love for someone. You start with someone where that's natural. When I do this exercise, I start with my kids and then expand it from there. How can I love my wife in that same unconditional way I love my kids, parents, siblings, and you move out from there? Let's talk about that a little bit. Have you had any experience with that?
Yeah, so I wrote in the book, and I still feel this way, like that is the edge. It's very interesting. So that writing about that was in reference to the Heart Sutra, which talks about just like a mother at the risk of her own life protects and cradles her only child. Thus we have a boundless love for the entire world. So in this Heart Sutra, the comparison is like a mother with your only child. You have the same boundless love for the whole world. And when first times I read that, it was before I had kids, I was like, oh, lovely. That sounds wonderful. I have that. And now when we come back down to the kind of brass tacks of it, definitely not. I definitely feel a different way about my family than I do about the world. Even if I may not wish anyone harm in the world, that kind of just entire, like a love that goes that deeply, that I feel so deeply connected, is not present in the same way. But I've had little moments, like just actually maybe a year ago on a retreat, we had like a light, we broke one of those light bulbs. And I wasn't sure if the light bulb was fluorescent or not. And you know how when you break a fluorescent light, not fluorescent, but one of those kind of like eco-friendly light bulbs, then...
Oh yeah, the ones that just explode when they break.
So annoying, yes. Then mercury, and you're supposed to like abandon the area and like air it out and all this kind of stuff. And I was pregnant at the time. And I remember when the light bulb broke, it was on the far end of the room. It was a large room. And so we were about to do a meditation. And they were cleaning up the light bulb, and we still at that moment didn't know if it was that kind with the mercury. And I said, like, you know what? I'm pregnant, so I'm going to take my cushion and sit on the other end of the room, and then I'll feel better. And as I did that, and as I started seeing all of the retreatants come into the room, and some sitting right next to the broken, where that broken light bulb was, I just started to have this horrible feeling like, what is the difference between this life that I'm trying to protect inside of me and this beautiful life that's over there sitting potentially near this source of poison? And I just, all of a sudden I got up and I was like, wait, we have to actually figure this out. Like, I can't just protect myself. This is ridiculous. And I think it's because I was sort of in that heightened heart space of a retreat where I could actually tap into that. There is literally no difference. There, like, a life is a life, and everybody deserves that kind of love and care. So, little pockets. Turned out it was not that kind of a light bulb. It was all fine. Just, it's just little edges of where the heart can be really expanded to include more and more people. And I love the way you connect it to meta practice, because that's where we're like going to the gym and weightlifting to expand our hearts that wide.
Yeah, I think similar to what you're describing, for me, it's been in those moments of practicing it that I get those glimpses, either seeing somebody, connecting for a moment. Maybe it's just mentally doing meta practice, but it's like for a minute I can grasp the concept of truly loving everyone the same way I love my own children, and it feels incredible. Now, and then you get back into the day-to-day routine, right? The habitual reactivity of life, and it's not as easy. But I love that you just compared it to the gym, because it's the same with the gym, right? It's like, well, what makes it work is that you go all the time and it's consistent, and you do a routine. That's when, after X amount of months or something, that's when you notice you're a lot stronger now. And I think this is similar. It's practice, 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 and then one day you realize, wow, it comes naturally to feel the compassion and the unconditional love much easier than I did before. Yes.
Yeah. I had one a teacher say that it's sort of like the heart is one muscle. So it's either open or closed. It's not like a dimmer switch that you can kind of keep in one area. And so as you work that muscle, it's going to keep opening and opening, and more and more people can fit. But when we're like tightened around just a little nuclear family, it's actually not, it's not as liberating. Like you said, it doesn't feel good. It actually doesn't feel very good. It feels tight and constricted.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. If you were to offer just one snippet of advice to someone listening who's saying, I want to have a more mindful relationship with whoever they're thinking of, whatever, what tips would you give? Are there specific meditation techniques, or just advice to someone who wants to introduce mindfulness into their relationships?
Yeah. I have a meditation, a mindful love meditation in the back of my book. And on that one, it's about kind of coming home to and realizing how much you have been loved over the course of your life, and how much you have loved. Because I think where a lot of us run into trouble and run into difficulty with relationships is this feeling of like we're coming in and we're beggars and we're empty, and the other person must fill us or must meet our needs because we don't have anything here. And so this practice focuses on, from the beginning, even if people hurt you when you were a child, even if things were not wonderful, which is the case for a lot of us, somewhere along the line, to have you survive until this day, many people did acts of love to keep you alive. And then you, maybe without even knowing it, have had enough in you to do acts of love for other people. So starting to tap into that fullness within oneself in meditation I think is really helpful for relationships. That's sort of number one. And then I think number two, it's really helpful to do that practice that we were talking about, really trying to see who is this other person and who am I, and really going back and forth on those pieces. And then there's like the kind of communication piece that when you're really communicating with someone, when you're in a fight, know when you need to take time away. One of my favorite lines on this is strike when the iron is cool, never hot. Get really cool if you possibly can before you engage with somebody that's triggering you. And then when you are engaged, as much as you can through communication, see if you can fully let the other person feel heard and seen before you then say, can I now share my piece of this? And that might be just repeating to them back exactly word for word what they say until they feel like you've got the whole story right, you've got their entire side of the story right, and then say, okay, now can I explain to you mine, and would you mind repeating it back to me? And so there's that's like a tip from the nonviolent communication folks who have an entire curriculum around that. But I think it's also deeply a mindfulness practice of being willing and able to be with oneself, to be with the boundary, and then to be with the other person.
Great. Okay, thank you for sharing that. One more aspect of it that I just thought of, we talk about the mirror and starting the process with learning to love yourself. You specifically mentioned in your book, you had this moment where you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you said, are you going to love yourself or not? Yeah. How do we start that process of introspection in a relationship? I want to improve my relationship. How do I start with me? Is there a first step or something like that?
Yeah, it's accepting, it's looking and accepting what is already there. And it's not going to happen overnight. We all carry a lot of judgment and pain, but it's almost like we have to marry ourselves and be like, I'm committed to this with you. And that was my moment when I asked myself, listen, are you in or are you out? Like, we have a life together, me and myself. And if I'm really committed to opening my heart to myself, loving myself over time, then I need to really accept what is there and to form a friendly relationship, even to the parts of myself I thought were so horrible and so ugly and that I never wanted anybody else to see. Just continually coming back to that and holding it with love and realizing that, it was probably parts of myself that developed when I was very young in response to situations that were out of my control. And so for me, all of meditation, all of this process of even just coming back to our breath and coming back to our feelings, coming back to the things that arise is a practice of learning to love oneself. And it's not a fast process, but if you're committed, if you've put that ring on, then that's where the work happens. And that's where you will slowly just start to love this being that you are.
Yeah, thank you. And again, just going to the gym analogy, right? We wouldn't think if I go to the gym today for 10 hours, then I'll finally be strong. Right. It's like that. It doesn't work that way. In fact, that's going to be really bad for you, probably.
Right.
Tear all your muscles. So yes, consistency and time, and that's how it works. Very much the same way as going to the gym would.
And the only other thing I would add, which I think I didn't before, is that part of the meditation process is hearing our inner critics. And so, because otherwise they're just running our life. Like, you're stupid. Why are you such an idiot? Why do you do things this way? You're such a failure. Like, these things that we just say to ourselves constantly without second guessing it. And so I think another piece of the meditation practice where we start to hear this voice and then don't believe it, slowly start to interrogate that voice and not kick it out, but just not believe that it's true.
Yeah, I love that. Because I do think early on, or we focus a lot of energy on trying to silence the voice,
Yes.
or thinking that this won't be okay until that voice is gone. I need to get rid of it. And then you're just up for disappointment, because the surprise is, hey, the voice doesn't go away. But it's the moment, like you just said, when you realize I don't have to believe my own thoughts.
Yes.
Oh, well, now they can just be there. They can say whatever. And you're like, oh, there's that thought again.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have power over you anymore.
Right. And if anything,
Yep.
you just have a lot of room for all of these voices that, again, like, were probably created when you were very young, and they are still young. They're not so wise. And so
Yeah.
they're not like these big evil demons that they are, that they feel like so much of the time.
Sure. Okay, let's shift topics and talk a little bit about social activism now.
Yeah.
One of the common things I hear, and I'm sure you encounter this too, a misconception it seems about mindfulness or living mindfully is, if you're mindful, you're just kind of content with what is, and there are bad things happening in my community or in the world, and I'm like, well, whatever, let things be. And I think that's a fundamental misconception. So I want to address that a little bit. How there's social activism, right? Any form of social justice or work that we do in that arena. How does mindfulness come and fit in? How does it improve social activism?
Yes. So this goes right back to that analogy I was saying in that meditation room that day, where I thought to myself, okay, I'll protect my baby that's, in the womb. I'll protect myself, and other people can work it out for themselves. And the more that we really tap in, the more we open our hearts, but also just experientially understand that we are deeply interconnected, and that we sink or we swim as a species, as a world together. That kind of like, I'm here, I'm in this just for myself and maybe like a couple other people, and everybody else can, fend for themselves. That starts to break down. That starts to actually start to see, not because it's like the right thing to do, but because actually that leads to more suffering for myself and for others. It leads to more feeling of like a wall of a division, which then makes me feel imprisoned behind this wall, this imaginary wall. I am separate from everyone else. And so the more that we practice, and the more we really truly see how our fates are completely tied in together, then the more that we can't sit by when other people are deeply suffering. And we've always, unfortunately, lived in a world where there are people suffering. And hopefully not, hopefully this will not be the case sometime in the world, but I assume for my lifetime, there will always be people suffering. But it's no longer an option to just be like, well, I'll just meditate so that I can feel calm on my day-to-day walk to work, because you're not gonna feel calm. It's not going to ease some of that inside suffering that you have, while other people are still in pain. And so that's the connection in my mind.
I really like what you shared in your book, a quote. This was, I think, from the Aboriginal. The quote says, if you have come here to help your time, but if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together.
Right.
Because that's introducing the idea of interdependence again, right? That we're all connected. And I think of that not just in the context of going and doing, building schools somewhere in the world, like something big. I'm thinking, wow, this is extremely relevant in my relationships just here with a friend who it's like, hey, I want to help you. But how different that perception is if it feels like I'm helping you because I know what's good for you and I know how you need to be, versus we're tangled up in this together. Let's work together,
right. Right. The helping mentality is like asymmetrical power structure, and adults don't really like to be helped on a large scale, but everybody needs, real solidarity and people working in alignment with them.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating? Because as we're hardwired as social creatures to want to fit in. Almost everything we do revolves around the making sure I fit in and that I'm not excluded.
Yes.
And yet, I think we have such a hard time feeling like receiving help. So it's like, I want to be part of a team, but I don't want you to do anything for me. So, but if we're doing it together as a team, that's great. That's what I actually want.
Yeah.
So it seems like that's another way to kind of shift that mindset. It's like, I'm on your team. We're working together here.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think to some degree, it's actually legitimate to not want to like be helped by someone who has no idea what your circumstances are, who, when it's a patronizing relationship, it can often feel like the person is trying to just help you for themselves. And the same way, like, if I want to help someone else, it's sometimes just so that I feel better, but then it's all about me. It's not really about them. So It's a realignment of that.
Yeah. And I think sometimes in my past experience, I think sometimes that's aggravated by certain beliefs, right? If I want to save you, it's like, oh, I'm not saved the way that I am. Nope, I'm going to save you. And I try to make sure that doesn't, I think it's easy to have that extend in even Buddhist practice where it's like, you need more mindfulness like me. Look how mindful I am, and it just doesn't work to have that mindset. It's so far off the mark.
That same way of kind of trying to manipulate others. It's just using these different tools, but people feel manipulated because there is that kind of manipulation happening, even if you think you have the best intentions.
Mm-hmm. Something I wanted to highlight with social activism and kind of going back to that misconception of that Buddhism isn't really engaged socially. I think of someone like Martin Luther King as a good example of this, where, just imagine for a moment how ineffective all of his work would have been if he was hyper reactive and highly emotional in his approach, very reactive, and it would be completely ineffective. I think what made him such an effective power for enacting change was he was very calm and level-headed, and he had wise things to say, and he could present things in a way that made people think, oh yeah, why are we doing this? Why are we not doing that? And I think that, to me, is the key of the connection between mindfulness and social activism. Is what we're trying to accomplish through mindfulness is essentially skillful means, right? So if I'm going to be engaged in a social cause, I want to be as effective as possible. So mindfulness can help me to be more skillful in my engagement with whatever cause I'm in. And when I see it that way, then I realize, oh, well, mindfulness is a really powerful tool to increase the effectiveness of whatever social engagement I'm involved with.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And at the same time, I want to be careful also, because it doesn't mean that you don't, I imagine, and I think from what I've read of his writings, Martin Luther King felt things,
Oh, absolutely.
Felt, frustration and suffering and had those kind of strong responses. So I know that that's not what you're saying, that we don't feel even like furious or angry or deeply wounded or afraid, but that like you so beautifully said, that we develop the right strategies and skillful means to address it. And then the only other thing I would add to that is that you could say that about anything like this, that mindfulness could bring you skillful means to do a bank takeover or something like that, or to invade a country, or, which is true. I think
the Italian job, right?
Exactly. Like, it's just, it is actually like to give you those tools of calming and focusing and being responsive and not reactive. It does give you those tools. So in that case, it's correct. But then if you couple that with also the interconnection that we're talking about, and the kind of commitment to relieving suffering, then it becomes that you not only have the skillful means, but you also cannot do things that harm people. And you can't even have, and I write about this in my book, this line that I love, which is like, how you do anything is how you do everything. So there, I think we who do engage in social justice oftentimes find ourselves sometimes in situations where the language is vitriolic against the other side, or it's dehumanizing of the other side in a way that I think does not do us any favors. I think it just perpetuates this, again, that sense of a division of those people are bad and we're good, and we just have to win, and then we'll be okay. And that's the real hard work, that when you're fighting for justice, that nobody can be left out of. It doesn't mean that, you don't hold people accountable, or that you don't restrain them when they're doing harm or anything like that, but that it's all done with the spirit of we are connected. Then it's an entirely different kind of a spirit.
Yeah. And for me, I think that's what makes it so powerful, is knowing that the sense of wanting to do something arises naturally out of understanding that we're interdependent, rather than this is what you should do. Why? Because it's what you should do, right? It's not compelled. It's not a commandment. It's not, I'm supposed to love everyone, so here I go. Right. It arises very naturally out of understanding, and that understanding arises through, sitting and meditating or practicing mindfulness. Then it's like, oh, why are we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? Why, and all of it is natural. And I think that's an important part to highlight, because when it arises naturally, I think we can be more skillful and more determined with the cause, because we're doing this because this is what feels natural. It's not, I'm doing this just because.
Right. Absolutely. And there's a Zen proverb that says, in Zen, we do two things. We sit and we sweep the garden. It doesn't matter how big the garden is. And that's the proverb. And that's the sort of spirit when you feel just so overwhelmed by the state of the world. Then I think when you're like, well, time to pick up my broom and sweep my little tiny corner of the garden, and I'm just going to do that until I die. Like, it doesn't matter if the garden is as big as the whole world. That's my job. And that's what gives you the sustainability to do that long term.
Yeah. And to do what I can, where I can, and when I can, which is now. Right. And not have that feeling overwhelmed. Like, well, if I can't, I do this with work. When I have enough projects on my table or on my plate, I can feel overwhelmed and think, well, I'm never going to get any of it done, so I guess I'll just sit here and not do any of it. And I think that can translate to social activism, where it's like, this is so overwhelming, I just won't do anything.
Yeah.
And I think mindfulness helps us to take that step back and say, but you can do something. I can do this, this little thing that I'm doing here, and that's where I start.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And not only can you, but it's for the sake of all of us. It's for the sake of yourself and for all of us. One of my teachers, Rabbi Alan Liu, once said, walking around the world we have sometimes like this psychic squint. We're trying to screen out all the unpleasant, all the suffering, all the things that people are going to, and we're just trying to be happy just by ourselves. And that psychic squint gives us headaches. It gives us entire life headaches. And so to really commit ourselves even to our little corners of the garden means to really open our eyes and to say, I'm not going to wall myself away from this anymore. And it's tremendously freeing to do that. To me, it feels like, okay, I accept there is suffering, and I'm going to do what I can, and I'm not going to hide myself away anymore.
Yeah. I like that. I like that analogy of the squinting.
Yeah.
And what's the irony of a strategy like that is that the thing that you're doing is the thing that's causing it to be worse, right? It's like, I'm doing this because I want to be shielded, but that's also what's preventing me from taking in all the things that that are great.
Exactly. You screen out the suffering, you screen out the joy.
Yeah.
They're all part of the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for anyone who's watching live who has questions, now would be a great time if you want to, if you're on the Crowdcast website, you can post your question or put it in the chat. I'm just going to check really quick on the Facebook one and see what's going on there real quick. I would hate to find out later there was some really good question and we just didn't see it. I'm assuming it all worked and it's broadcasting the way it's supposed to. Yeah, it's live. Okay. So I see I see comments, but I don't see any questions on there, and I don't see any questions on here either. And we are approaching the 1 hour mark, so I don't want to keep you too long and take your precious time. But let's just shift quickly to the idea of insecurity, intense emotions, and insecurity in general. I think this ties into what we've talked about. There's insecurity in relationships. There's insecurity in the things that we do. Is what I'm doing helping? Am I just wasting my time? What should I be doing in life? Like, there's a lot of insecurity in life, and across all the age groups. I think it's especially evident in those younger ages where, you know, you're trying to decide, hey, this is where I pick the path that goes this way or this way. Uh-oh, what if I get the wrong one?
Yeah.
But then it's evident later in life too, because you go down the path and you're like, is this the path I should have gone down? Most adults have thoughts like, is this the person I should have married? Is this the career I should have gone into? Like, what would it be like if I was over there, right? So this insecurity that we seem to live with at any given moment. We talked earlier about how mindfulness as a skill set, as a tool, is trying to help us to get more comfortable with the discomfort.
Yes.
And the fact is, life is uncomfortable, and thoughts like that are natural. So again, rather than thinking, uh-oh, I need to never think those thoughts, it's just saying, where did that thought come from? Exploring it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that just for a second. How do we become more comfortable with the discomfort, with the insecurity?
Yeah, I'm really happy you framed it that way, because I think that's exactly what it is. It's not finding a solid ground that you can stand on necessarily. It's learning how to surf on waves that sometimes will take us under, and sometimes will just be enough that we can kind of move our bodies and be flexible and surf gently on those waves. And then when we're completely knocked over, we try and get back up on that surfboard again. And it is, I truly believe that the Buddha's message, that certainly, like, my experience has been that the world is constantly changing. We are constantly changing, and that any solidity is just from releasing into the waves. It's from releasing into a world that we can't control and stopping fighting it. And it's over and over again, this knowledge, this understanding that when we try, we can change as much as we can change, obviously, and we do as much as we can do, and we try and get ourselves closer to feeling whole and feeling happy. But then when the world knocks us out again, trying to just say, okay, I'm knocked out, or I'm on very unsteady ground, and this is what's true, and really sinking into that. So that's the challenge.
Yeah. I love the analogy with surfing, because you can't catch the wave if you're not going with the flow, right? And anything static in surfing that spells disaster. It doesn't work. You can't stay in one spot.
Yeah.
If the wave is too big, I better go under it. If the wave is just right, I'm going to ride it. there's a lot of dynamic stuff happening there, but definitely nothing static.
Yes.
Um,
And then when we're
I like that
bad
analogy.
and things are really bad, the thing that makes it absolutely worse is fighting it, fighting that riptide. So you have to just swim into the currents. That's what they always teach you. And
Uh-huh.
and that's the journey of our life, is to figure out, it's like the serenity prayer, to change the things you can change, and to really accept and grieve, or and, to mourn and to be with the things you can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah, I love that. Well, great. This has been a really fun topic, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me for this call. For those of you who are listening or watching later, Yael's book is called What Now? Meditation for Your 20s and Beyond. And I read this, and I was telling Yael earlier that one of the things that was really evident to me is this stuff is for anyone, right? It's written from the perspective of a lot of the experiences during those 20s and 30s, but all of the concepts in here, every single one of them, are applicable at any stage in life. So if you're interested in learning more about Yael's approach with her book, What Now? Pick this up. I assume it's available in all of the major places where you can buy books. And I will put the link on the Secular Buddhism website when I post this interview. I'll have the video, the audio for the podcast, and I'll have links to Yael's website and to her book, at least on Amazon. Leia says, great surfing analogy. I hadn't realized you can choose to go under the wave as a positive option. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Great. Do you have any final closing thoughts you want to share with us, Yael?
Well, I just want to thank you so much. It was such a fun conversation, and I had a really nice time exploring these things with you. And I just want to let everybody know that in addition to my website, which you'll post, yaelshai.com, you can also find me on all the social medias at yaelshai #1.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Yael. I'm going to end the live portion of this. Thank you to everyone who listened and participated live. This will be posted on the podcast hopefully later today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.